I guess that means it's time to start. I never let that get to the end before. Okay, so let's start. People will join us as they come along. So again, a warm welcome. I'd encourage you just to type in the chat your name, your position, and what country you're on. And for those of you on the call, you'll be aware that this is the fourth module in the Health System Strengthening Workforce Development series. And for those of you who have been on our journey so far, thank you very much for participating. We've had Module 1, which was an introduction to assessing workforce development, understanding the different elements of workforce development in supply chain management. We had Module 2, which was looking more at policy and plan intervention. And Module 3, which was extended module 2 weeks ago, where we were looking at workforce development specifically around competency development, speaking about pre-service, speaking about in-service, speaking about a range of education approaches. Now, this week in Module 4, the title is HR Management Interventions. Now, in this particular module, it's a bit more of standard human resources systems and procedures. And we've got an exciting time ahead where we're going to be looking at that in some detail in what procedures and policies should be in place for a human resources system to work properly. And we've got lots of guidance and lots of tools to share with you. As part of our time together today, I'd like to remind you that you're free to type in the chat anytime. If you have a question, if you have a point of clarification as you go along, then please type that into the chat, and I will be watching that chat as we move ahead with our series today. So that's what we did last time, and for those of you who missed our last module session, or any of the previous modules, they are all recorded and all the resources are available. And if you have a look in the invitation for this particular today, so I'll just up my volume for you, just to make sure. Evans, how's that? Is that a little bit better of the volume? Otherwise, I'll get you to check your sessions. I've checked with a couple of colleagues to make sure that they can hear me, and if that's different, I'll ask Matt as my monitor to let me know if there's any issues to do with the screen or with the volume. Thanks, Matt. So what we'll be looking at today, and the objectives that I want to cover, is understanding the general principles of HR management interventions, exploring the guidance and tools we have available, and then again considering country application. For those of you who have been following our series, you'll be aware that for each of our... Okay, you're having trouble hearing me? Okay, let's go to maximum. So, Matthew, just checking again. Again, my apologies for technological issue. Okay, I'm just going to try one thing. Just give me about 20 seconds. Okay, how's that now, Matthew?
That's much better.
Okay, I just changed devices just quickly, and that appears to have worked. So my apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I had the computer going through a
another device which has caused some trouble. Thank you, Matthew, for just clarifying that we're back up and running.
Yep,
so,
all good.
Thank you, everybody. So what I was pointing out is that as part of the sessions that we've been running, you will have noted a session plan attached to each invitation. If you've not seen that, again, I would encourage you to look at those session plans, because the overall modules that I'm providing, there's a bunch of background reading, there is material we cover in this Skype webinar, and then there's a series of post readings as well as an assignment. And again, just a reminder, if anyone's interested in getting a certificate for this series, you need to complete each of the 5 assignments. I have on the screen now make that work. So just on the screen now, I have the module overview that I just want to go through. And the screen should be back up and now running. Thank you, Evans, just was changing devices. And the particular things I want to emphasize here is that there's been a lot of work done in the supply chain sector around human resources policies and processes. And what I wanted to do is just to point out a couple of those that I want you to read about as part of pre-reading. The first one was about recruiting supply chain professionals. There's a fantastic ready reference guide and kit that was made available through the USA Deliver project, and this is great. I would encourage everyone to mute themselves. So please just double check that you put yourselves on mute. The other kit that I want to talk to you about is this item here called Discrete Choice Experiment. This is a Capacity Plus intra-health tool, and what the tool does is enables you with a group of co-workers to establish what particular elements they would like to see in the workplace in order for them to be more likely to stay in the workplace. So it's a staff retention tool. We often get asked about what we're doing with regard to performance-based incentives, and financial incentives is one aspect of that. So there's some guidance there on how commercial sector does performance-based financing of individuals and of teams, and that might be of interest. In terms of country case studies, because it's always interesting how we apply this to the country, there is a report here about how Namibia applied this rapid retention survey, and the results of this survey end up being a series of interventions that the government can take to improve retention and what the cost of those interventions are. And in Mozambique, there's the results of how they tried to apply financing incentives using a private sector approach. I think you'll find that helpful. The other resource that's in the pre-reading to emphasize is this is from Sudan, and it's a very comprehensive range of job descriptions that I think you will find are very helpful if one of the tasks you have to do is to do job descriptions. So with those as background resources, what I'd like to then do is move on to our talk today. If you remember the very first module and webinar I provided you, we spoke about the bus, getting the right people on the bus, putting people in the correct seats on the bus, keeping the right people on the bus, and getting the wrong people off the bus. And this is what I'd like to do today is to continue with that analogy, that metaphor, and reminding ourselves that the bus is our organisation, whether it's the organisation that we're supporting, or whether it's the organisation within which we work, depending on where we're applying these principles. So first one, let's talk about this bus. And our overall aim, if you remember again from our first webinar, was to be able to integrate the use of systems, policies and practices required to provide the necessary range of functions to plan, produce, deploy, manage, train and support the supply chain workforce. And you remember that one of the key takeaway messages I said was capacity development of human resources is not training. And in this regard, you will again see plan, produce, deploy, manage, train, and support. That the training aspect, which we spoke about last week, is only one element. And in this particular webinar, we want to emphasize some of the other elements. The other thing we're trying to do is to have strong organizational HR management systems that help to create the enabling work environments for high-level performance for supply chain workers. So it's not just having the workers, it's not just having the workers have competency, but you need to have strong HR systems to support them. A lot of the comments we get from the field is about staff retention, about performance management, about a lack of motivation. And they're the sorts of things we're going to talk about today from a policy and procedures perspective. And just in summary, these are the overarching policies and procedures we're going to follow. And I'd like to remind you, please, to put your microphones on mute. So please put your microphones on mute. Thank you. Trying to quickly say, sorry, can you please put your microphones on mute? Okay. These are the particular systems and procedures we're talking about. We're talking about job descriptions, we're talking about selecting employees, we're talking onboarding and orientation. And then for putting people in the correct seats, we're talking about supportive supervision, performance management, and succession planning. And then keeping people on the bus, we're talking about staff retention and the work environment. And getting the wrong people off the bus, we're talking about managing poor performance and staff exit. And again, I'm afraid someone has their microphone on. And let's see if we can. I can't quite find today the button to mute everybody. We'll continue on. And if you can note who the person is who has their microphone on, if you could just let them know. And on the screen in front of you is a document that's about to be published, so you're getting an early look at this particular document. This document is the theory of change for human resources that the People That Deliver initiative with USAID funding is working on. And it's basically saying that if you want to optimize work performance, you need to have the right staffing, you need to have them with the right skills, you need to have the right working conditions, and you need to make sure your staff are motivated. And we call these 4 areas pathways. And we need to have these pathways active in a particular organization if we want to have good work performance. If we only have 1 or 2 of these happening, then we do not have optimized work performance. So what we're talking about is policies, procedures, templates, but also competent managers. Just because you're a technical person or a manager in an organization is technical does not mean that they have the skills to manage people well. And this is something that I will emphasize. So it's not good enough just to have policies, procedures, and the templates to make things work. You need to have competent managers. So often the Public Service Commission or the HR department or ministry or organisation sets the policies and procedures. The implementation is usually left to department managers, and one of the issues is consistent implementation by managers. I hear in my role lots of people who complain about HR policies and procedures not consistently implemented. I'd like you to take the time in the chat just to note, why do you think human resources policies and procedures, where they are present in an organisation, are not implemented properly? Why are these procedures not implemented properly from your experience? And I'd appreciate you to type some of these things in the chat as we go along, and I'll refer to those as you type them in. Also, opportunity, just as I set the stage, if you've got any questions, just a reminder that you can feel free to type in the chat at any time. And thank you, Anita. So resistance to change is quite a big issue as to why. Another one is that managers don't know the policies and procedures. Great. And I would also say that one of the big ones is that managers don't have necessarily the competencies all the time to interact with their staff in a way that helps them grow and mature. Okay, so the question that comes, financial constraints can be another one as well. So keep typing those in, and I'll let you read them from this point. Thank you for those contributing. Thank you, Victor, Anne, Anita, and Matthew. So how do you improve HR management? So this is a big question with regard to HR management. So the steps that I would suggest we consider, and in your context to consider, is to review existing policies and procedures and templates for relevance, best practice, and ease of use. Sometimes systems aren't used because they're quite cumbersome. Then, through a process of engagement, update these policies. By engagement, I found when I work with managers and staff in an organisation to update systems and procedures, it's much more well accepted. We've mentioned change management as one of the resistances. And by engaging people in understanding the policies and procedures and why they are benefit for individuals as well as for the overall organisation is also very helpful. Sometimes HR procedures are seen as police-like activities. In other words, that people feel that the HR systems are there just to monitor, supervise, and really make life hard for employees, when in fact a well-run human resources system is for the benefit of the employees, to help them feel engaged in the organisation and to contribute. Now, after you've revised a process, then you must implement the revised process, ensuring that relevant managers have the competencies and budgets, and I noticed some people mentioning finance, in order to follow through on the HR procedures. And again, from my perspective and my experience in business and a range of organisations, is the human resources are the engine room for any organisation to succeed. And often we don't give enough time to maintaining that particular engine. One of the other points I want to re-emphasise here in the blue box is we need to aim to remove gender discrimination in the workplace through the introduction of gender transformative interventions and strategies. This is also a point we emphasise in our first module, that supply chain is a career for both men and women, but often the way it's designed and the policies in place are discriminatory. And so I'd refer you back to that module where there was a range of resources. So the next question we ask ourselves is what are the policies and procedures that should be in place? And this is where we go back to thinking about the bus. Now, one of the exciting resources for this module is I've taken the time to provide you all, as part of this, with a full complement of templates that you could use to run a human resources system. So there's a Dropbox which has been provided for you, was part of the invite, but will also be reissued as part of the. You can get access to this link, of course, from this slide deck, which is in the Dropbox that was provided with this invitation. Now, basically, in that Dropbox is a whole range of templates that I have prepared and actually used in my own business, running of businesses historically, that I've provided for people to have a look at to get an idea of some of the tools that can be helpful. So, for example, we have a recruitment plan, we have job description template, quite a comprehensive one. I've got interview template when you're conducting staff recruitment interviews, reference checking template, letter engagement, induction checklist, conducting performance reviews, performance appraisals, personnel file checking and organising, and staff exit forms. And I would encourage you to have a look through those because they give you a real understanding of the detail that's necessary in your supporting documentation to run a good human resources system. Also, let's not forget that human resources is an issue in every aspect of development. So whether it's health, agriculture, schooling, human resources, planning and management is a cross-cutting, not just in supply chain. And these particular links here are particular online resource repositories with a whole bunch of extra resources around human resources management and development. USAID Capacity Plus, which was a previous project USAID funded, the Human Resources for Health Global Resource Center, another USA repository, Global Health Workforce Alliance, which is a big WHO resource center on human resources, and then the USAID Development Experience Clearinghouse, which is also called the DEC. These particular repositories have a wealth of information, and I encourage you to explore them. The other thing we've been using as a reference in this particular module series is the Workforce Development 10-pager that I made. We introduced you to that in the these particular documents are introduced to you in Module 1 and again are available in the Dropbox. So a question from Annie is that, are these documents based on indicators from the PDD competency framework? So within the competency framework that People That Deliver provides, it outlines a whole set of competencies that need to be present to ensure that the human resources systems are put in place. And so it refers to the need for these sorts of policies and procedures, but the competency framework is not descriptive on what should be included. So yes, it's aligned with the competency framework, but has extra elements. Thank you for your question. Keep your questions coming. So getting the right people on the bus is really important. I find in talking to different organisations, the hardest thing to do is to remove incompetent or unproductive people from organisations. Whether that's legal reasons or whether it's cultural reasons, that's the hardest thing to do. So this makes it very important to ensure that you actually select the right people to start with. One of the key documents around this is having the right job descriptions. I'm not going to go through a whole job description here, but I've given you examples of excellent job descriptions in the pre-reading. In the tools I've provided is a job description template, which is a very detailed template. There are 3 things I want you to look at carefully if you're ever doing job description review. One of those is, does the education and training match the supply chain competencies of the job? Good example would be, I've seen an excellent job description for a warehouse manager and all the competencies beautifully laid out. But the education that was requested for the person to run the overall warehouse was specifically a pharmacist education only. Now, I'm a pharmacist, for those of you who know me, and I have no problem with pharmacists being involved in supply chain activities. But a pharmacist with a standard pharmacy degree does not have the competencies to run a whole warehouse. They can do various aspects of the warehouse, but someone to run a whole warehouse needs the proper training to run a warehouse, is the comment I'd like to make. So whenever you have a job description and you're asking for particular qualifications, double check that the qualifications you're asking for actually prepare the particular person for the job you want them to do. And you might be surprised that this is not always the case, and you need to look carefully. Are they clear and detailed? Job descriptions should not only specify the responsibilities, the education requirements, but also the reporting requirements and particularly key performance indicators. How success will be measured in that particular job. And this particular element is often left out in preparing job descriptions. When selecting employees, again, the pre-reading material gives you an open and transparent process to be followed for that to happen. An open and transparent process will ensure that people with the right competencies are selected for the job, rather than someone's relative or someone's friend. And I am aware in a number of cultures, the pressures for supporting family, friends, etc. are very strong and often an overriding process. So for example, I was aware in one of our PSM countries, country director was able to prepare a fantastic job description for a supply chain manager for the whole country at a fantastic level in the ministry. This was all agreed, but there was not an open and transparent process, and so one of the officials' cousins was given the job who had less than the competencies required to complete the job, as an example. I'm sure you can all give stories about that. But if we're not choosing the right people as part of an open and transparent process, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. The other aspect is that when you have a selection panel, the usual best practice is to have 3 people on that panel, and that one of those people should be, so there should be good gender appropriate. So men and women should be on that panel, not just men, not just women. The other thing is just to ensure that it's a competency-based approach. In the materials I've provided as templates, it gives you some clear processes to follow to run a competency-based interview and a competency-based recruitment process. With regard to onboarding and orientation, this is another area where most organisations do not prepare things well. Just a reminder of the first job. Think about the first job that you ever had out of university. When you came to work that very first day or that very first week, you had all the skills from your education. But my question is, how well were you equipped to be able to be productive in that workplace immediately? And it would be nice if you wanted to share anything in the chat about that. My personal experience is I had a pharmacy degree. I turned up to my first pharmacy job and I was lost. I did not know how to apply my skills into that work environment because of the systems, the procedures, and the way things were laid out. I needed to have an orientation and an onboarding process that helped me able to apply my skills to that work environment. And this is something that organisations often overlook. As an example, when I was running pharmacy businesses, I provided a 2-hour orientation for my pharmacists before I even put them into my pharmacy, so they knew the systems, the procedures, and expectations of the job. For my staff who worked in the pharmacy business, I provided them with 1 or 2 days worth of orientation to the systems, procedures, expectations, and how the business worked before I let them work on the business. And I also buddied them up with a more experienced staff member in order to help them understand what was required. The point I want to make here is that onboarding of staff is often overlooked, and we need to think about administrative onboarding as well as technical onboarding. So how do you apply your supply chain management skills that you learn in this new workplace? What is expected? And organizations that do more efficient onboarding and orientation are the organizations that have their staff more productive, more quickly, and also as a staff member who experiences onboarding and good orientation, you are going to feel better and have a greater motivation to be involved in the workplace. Thanks, Matthew, for your comment, and I know Anita writing something as well. You might like to share your own experience about what your experience was first time on the job without orientation and how you felt. My experience has been both good and bad. A good experience was where I had a very thorough orientation and was able to be productive from the first day I got onto the floor of the business, so to speak. And poor orientation was where I had to find my own way around, and it took me a lot greater amount of time. Now, getting the right people on the bus, job descriptions. I've got links here for a range of job descriptions from Sudan, as well as this professional CARTA dossier that we prepared in Mozambique, which also has a range of excellent job descriptions. I mentioned the Recruiting Supply Chain Professionals Rarity Reference Guide, and then I've put here a reference to a particular onboarding checklist that I've prepared that gives you an idea of the sorts of things that you should include as part of the onboarding process. If you've got any questions about that, then you can let me know. And again, at any time during our this presentation, if you want to type in a question or a comment in the chat, please feel free to do so for the benefit of everyone. So again, in that previous section, I was emphasizing the importance of getting people on the bus. And I would not be cutting corners when it comes to the energy and time you need for that purpose. Sometimes for managers working in organizations, there is a frustration about the time they spend on human resources. When I was managing a company, of 50 people. This is an example. It was a pharmacy, so it was an organisation that involved a lot of supply chain work. But organisation, I spent between one third of my time and sometimes up to half of my time on human resources related activities. Because for me, making sure I had an excellent team working well motivated, improved the overall performance of my organisation more than if I was doing lots of those things myself. At least one third of my time when I was a manager was spent managing the people rather than doing technical activity. And this is something that is important to consider. When it comes to putting their people in the correct seats on the bus, the sorts of things we want you to think about is supportive supervision, performance management, and succession planning. When we think about supportive supervision, the big issues for me that I've come across, and you've mentioned these already, is do managers have the right competencies to be able to supervise staff? Do they have the human resources competencies to be able to provide feedback, to have a non-judgmental conversation with staff members regarding their productivity, and also what understanding of cultural competence, which means understanding different cultures and how to relate to them properly, and good leadership competencies to set good examples, all part of good supportive supervision. Budget needs to be available if there is any travel involved in supervision. You can have remote supervision, but we are, as people know, that interactions with each other is extremely important. We also note that, for me, follow up and follow through. There's nothing more frustrating from a staff member than to have a supportive supervision or to have an interaction with a manager that has action points that need to be done by the manager, and that manager does not follow through on what it is that they are going to do, whether it's providing access to an education opportunity, a resource to fix something in the facility, or whether it's to take action on a negative activity. If we don't, as managers, follow up and follow through, then that is also a very bad situation. I'll give you an example from my personal experience, and that is that I had a situation when I was running my business where there was a complete undersupply of pharmacists. I couldn't get enough, other pharmacies couldn't get enough staff. But pharmacists would come to me and want to work for me because of my strong human resources approaches, and I dealt with any problem they had quickly, openly, and transparently, whether it was a conflict between staff members or it was a resource they required to do their job properly. And you not to underestimate how important that is, the follow-up and follow-through in order to get things done. With regard to performance management, we need to have a system that rewards good performance and also corrects poor performance. Now, rewarding good performance does not have to be monetary incentives. I've provided resources about incentive programs. Rewarding good performance can simply be, thank you very much for doing good work. It can be giving them a certificate that says, I want to acknowledge that you're contributing well to the team. But any type of system that rewards good performance has to make sure that that performance is different and better than other people's performance, so it is noticeable, and that everyone is aware of the transparent process you use toward good performance. In the same way, bad performance needs to be dealt with as well. There's nothing more toxic to an organization's productivity and motivation than having poor performing staff members in a particular organization that get just the same privileges and their behavior is not corrected in any way. But I will acknowledge that this is a really hard thing to do. And again, in this talk, I am emphasizing that it's important. We're providing some resources for you to look up what a good performance management system involves. But the point that I want to highlight is it needs to be implemented consistently and regularly, and that the managers need to have the skills to make the system work. The other thing that's very important for staff motivation and morale in human resources is to ensure that any promotion is linked to performance management. Promotions that are not open and transparent and linked to performance management, but are based on friendships or relationships for family reasons, are really inappropriate and undermine the value of the human resources processes in an organisation. And so linking results to promotion is extremely important. An area that is particularly under addressed in supply chain organizations is succession planning. In a number of cultures, the idea of hanging on to the knowledge that you have is seen as being important because you don't want to let other staff members have the knowledge you have because they might undermine you or they might take your job. Succession planning actually flips that idea on its head and says, well, actually, if the business is going to be successful and if managers are going to be successful, they need to ensure that all of the critical jobs in an organization, there are people who are understudies for those jobs or being prepared to take on those jobs, so that if for whatever reason a particular person moves on, that there are other people in the organization ready to take on those responsibilities. For a number of countries, this is actually a cultural shift, and to move away from holding information and knowledge to creating a culture of sharing information and knowledge for the benefit of everyone and for the benefit of the organization. But I just want to particularly note that. And for those of you who are on our community of practice will have noted I sent out a lovely graphic that emphasizes that globally there's this change in culture to be more information sharing and why that's important. So the key thing for succession planning is that we've identified key positions which are critical to an organization and that we have a culture of information sharing and growth of personnel to prepare people for the future in terms of the organisation. Thanks, Annie, and also Porfa, for your comments. So the challenge, as you said, is deep diving into the policies and procedures, understanding those, and then looking about how to make sure they're applied. So usually you can find policies and procedures that are set by the government, but it's often the situation that the particular government department is responsible for implementing those policies and procedures, and they're left up to their devices to do so, and that's where a weakness can take place. And this HR management with transparency is really important and not something we do well. So these are the items we need to consider about putting people in their correct seats on the bus. In terms of resources, there is a range of supervision and on-the-job training for supply chain management at health facility. There's a great resource that's there for that purpose. In terms of performance management, there's performance management option guides and incentives that are here, as well as the performance management or annual performance appraisal guideline documentation that I've got in the resources folder. And then I've also provided a succession planning guide. This succession planning guide is a general succession planning guide provided to businesses that can be applied to any business, but they are other resources I would suggest you have a look at. So again, the idea for this particular webinar is to give you an overview of these areas and resources to dig deep, and for you to hear my emphasis on what I think is important from my experience and what you should be looking at. This next area, which is really important and probably what I get the most questions about, is keeping the right people on the bus. If you've got good workers, very competent workers, how do we improve staff retention and how do we keep the staff motivated? Motivation has been a constant theme of today's presentation, you will have heard, and that staff motivation is from a number of factors. When we're talking about staff retention, the reasons that people stay in a business are many. And you need to understand the local human resources environment for employees in order to understand what's necessary for them to stay. I often hear that government policies and procedures dictate what the wages are and what is able to be done in a particular context. I also can tell you that wages is only one aspect of staff retention. But it is true that unless the wage being provided is competitive, then that needs to be looked at first if you're going to address a staff retention issue. But apart from wages, there are a lot more things that motivate people to stay in a particular organisation. Understanding your local human resources marketplace, so what's happening in so if you're a government supply chain organisation, you should know what's happening in the private sector for similar jobs, what's happening in the development sector, and so that you're aware of what wages are, etc. I know at least one of the countries where I've done a bit of analysis is that there are more than 5 times difference between the wage paid by a government and the wage paid in private sector or some of the supply chain projects. So the wage differentiation in that particular country context is so huge that that particular supply chain organisation needs to either put a proposal to the Ministry of Finance to increase the wages, which is probably not possible, or realise that they're going to have constant staff turnover and plan for that to happen. And that's where your competency development and your succession planning become more important. The other thing is to think about what will encourage the staff to stay in your organisational. What I mean by that, and I mentioned a tool earlier on about the retention survey, is that by engaging with the employees of an organisation, you can understand what their needs are. There might be needs for education. It might be needs for schooling. It might be needs for housing. It might be needs for a stronger performance management system. If you understand what these needs are, you will quickly find that there are a number of things you can do with limited funding to improve a number of the things that are important to staff to keep them in an organisation. But you need to investigate what they are in order to do that. Yeah, thanks, Tidian. One of the important points to note is it is a big cost to a business to actually change an employee. The costs of actually recruiting, but also in lost productivity. Thanks for that thought, Tidian. The other aspects, so having a retention strategy means that you understand the local environment and you've highlighted what are the key areas that you're going to work on in order to keep staff in a business, whether they are financial or non-financial parts of the strategy. And also, one of the biggest frustrations with staff is not having strong HR management procedures in place and functional. They don't feel part of the team. They don't feel that it's a fair and transparent workplace. The other aspect, which is a relatively simple one financially to think about, is the work environment. Is it safe and secure for all employees? Are there appropriate facilities? For example, staff room for having lunch, toilets, etc. And are the work environment, are there checks done regularly to ensure that they're kept appropriate? And do employees understand their own responsibilities when it comes to work environment and workplace safety? Again, in the work environment, a significant part, as we saw with the pathways, for staff to really be engaged and interested in their workplace, but it's something that we don't think about very often. Again, some resources here. There's a rapid retention survey that I mentioned about helping you understand what's important for employees to stay in a workplace. And then for the work environment, I've got here a couple of links to some workplace checklists that can be done to see if an environment's in order. These are taken from other industries, but give you an idea of the sorts of tools you can use for that process. I'll also point out that the UNICEF HR assessment module, for which there is a linkage in the first part of the Workforce Development 10-pager, also has a good section on work environment checklist. as we move forward to the last element, and then this is just to remind me that if you have questions or points of clarification, or you want to share your own experience, then please put those into the chat as we move along. I mentioned earlier in the opening remarks about getting the wrong people off the bus is really important. Just before I do that, I'm noting Anita's comment here about rural staff retention. So it's not only an issue that an organisation is trying to retain their staff in the busy cities, but staff retention becomes even more of an issue when you move out to the countries. And there's been a lot of work done by WHO and others about things to consider even more specifically for rural staff retention. And in the 10-pager, you will notice that there is a document which summarises the evidence about how to retain staff in rural and remote environments. And I would refer you to that particular document. When we're managing poor performance, two key things that I want you to think about in my experience. One is that supportive supervision and performance management have systems. Are those systems in place? But more importantly, are they followed? And do staff have the competency to use the systems? And the other one, is poor performance addressed or ignored? If poor performance is ignored, you're setting yourself up for some major motivation and staff productivity issues in the workplace. And I just emphasize those. There are a lot of cultural aspects and team-related discussions that need to be discussed, often with higher-up managers, with regard to poor performance. But if this is an issue in the organisation, then it needs to be brought out as a discussion point, which should start around the policies and procedures for performance. Another area we do poorly is staff exit. In relation to staff exit, you need to have a procedure in place when staff exit a particular organisation. Now that procedure would be removing staff members' codes, would be making sure if they have any debts to the business they're paid, any outstanding reports are also delivered, all of those things. But one of the interesting things we overlook is exiting staff are a wealth of knowledge about your organisation. And as they leave an organisation, it is very important to interview those staff in order to understand why they're leaving the organisation, what they enjoyed about being in your organisation, and what they didn't enjoy, and what points for improvement. And you'll note in the staff exit procedure that I have noted here and provided you, it provides you with a suggested interview guide. But it's not just good enough to have this particular interview take place. You need to analyse the results and make sure management has those results and acted upon them. And my advice is for exit interviews to be conducted for every staff member that leaves, and those results of those interviews to be analysed and a report reviewed by managers every 6 months in order to understand what's happening. And that can be an early warning of particular issues, but also give you good information about how to make improvements in your organisations. One of the other aspects, again, with any of these procedures is to ensure that HR managers support staff exit procedures properly. Thanks to Anita for your comment. Your experience has been that sometimes that maybe fire people too quickly. My experience has been the opposite, that very reluctant. But if in your circumstances it's firing too quickly, there are many reasons for poor performance of staff. There would be some times where immediate dismissal is absolutely necessary, and this is usually to do with aspects like theft, severe professional misconduct, sexual misconduct, etc., where there is grounds for immediate dismissal. But often for poor performance, there can be reasons why that occurs that are not the fault of the individual. And by supporting that individual and understanding the problem and working with that individual, you can turn poor performance into good performance. And as Tidian mentioned earlier, not doing every time you have to change a staff member is severely costing the business. The other aspect is we know in supply chain that getting the right people is very difficult. So if you've got people that are relatively good, helping them to grow in their skills and their productivity is much better than just sacking them. Thank you for that. So this is a slide that is accidentally left over from last week, so my apologies for that one. That's just the curriculum resources from last week. So we'll go to this next one. So what I would like to do is just go down one more slide. So before we come back to the assignment to close, I just want to emphasize a couple of things. So today's overview was to help you think about HR management interventions. Again, to remind you that capacity development is much more than just training, and that this is thinking about the bus, getting the right people on the bus, putting people in the correct seats on the bus, keeping the right people on the bus, and getting the wrong people off the bus. All of these areas provide you with a comprehensive understanding of the standard systems and procedures that should be in place for human resources management to be effective. We've noted particularly that it's not just having the policies and procedures that are important, but having the tools, and even more importantly, the leaders and managers with the competencies necessary in order to deliver on those policies and procedures. We've emphasized the importance of transparency and the importance of following up and following through. And from my own personal experience in managing people in large organizations, these are critical to get most productivity out of staff members in a collegial way, working together. As I close, and again, I invite you to put any final questions or comments into the chat, is the assignment for this particular module is that there's a range of HR policies necessary for an effective HR system that maximizes staff performance, and we've spoken about those today. I want you to consider your country context and to write a scope of work to review and upgrade one of these HR procedures with its associated policies, procedures, and templates. As you prepare that scope of work, I want you to think about what you want the consultant to consider, what methods they should use, who you want them to talk to, what steps you want them to take, and what deliverables you want. So the idea here is that I want you to take one of these HR procedures that we've spoken about and think about, if you were going to review that procedure in your country, how would you do it? And a good way to do that is to prepare a scope of work. Now that scope of work could be actually given to yourself to do if you have a capacity development role in the country, or it might be something you want to outsource to someone else. But that is the particular assignment that is for this particular assignment. So with that, I want to thank you very much for listening and for participating today. We still have a couple of minutes if you have any questions that you want to type in. I would also remind you that in the session outline for today, there is a lot of extra reading for people that really want to go a lot deeper. So you will notice that there is the yellow textbook, Managing Access to Medicines and Health Technologies, that has a very big section on human resources management. And this was some post-reading last week and some post-reading this week. And I'd really encourage you to have a look at that if you want to have a deeper understanding. So again, thank you very much. There will be a recording and resources for this that I'll make available so that you will be able to use these resources in your environment and share with others. And our final module in this workforce development series will be next week, and I'll send you out a invitation for that. And that module is going to be focusing on how we can grow the competency of ourselves and individuals that we need to work with as part of capacity development. So thank you very much and have a great day. Bye for now.